Welcome to the next generation. Today, we are joined by Kacee Bohle, a truly amazing speaker and coach in the agricultural industry, specializing in extinguishing burnout. With over 14 years in the industry and a fourth generation upbringing, Kacee brings a unique perspective to personal growth and professional development. She is here to bring practical strategies to achieve balance, overcome burnout, and set healthy boundaries, which I'm sure we could all use. Join us as Kacee shares insights on maximizing focus, energy, and time in your life. Let's dive into this conversation on purpose-driven living with Kacee Bohle. Welcome to the podcast, Kacee.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to just start out the podcast a little bit with a little bit about your story and who you are, where you come from, what brought you to where you are right now, and just kind of tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me again. I love doing podcast interviews. I think it's such a great way to just really learn some of the behind the scenes about somebody. And just to give a little quick background on who I am. So, Kacee Bohle grew up in West Central Indiana on a farm. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. So, obviously, went to school for agriculture, came back home to the farm, and quickly realized that I have champagne taste on a well water budget. And so my parents were like, yeah, you're going to need to go get a real job outside of the farm. And so I spent a couple of years right out of college working for John Deere, also farming. And I quickly found myself burnt out at the age of 23. And I was like, there's no way that I can keep doing this. The pace that I was at such a very early age was already burning me out. And I was like, I got to do something different. And so switched jobs. I still worked for John Deere. I went from going from the dealership to corporate John Deere, moved out to Missouri, traveled around the state, managing different dealerships. And then baby number one came, and I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? And so I left that job, found myself working for a company locally that still paid pretty good, but honestly was really burnt out there as well. I wasn't doing work that filled my cup up. I was traveling quite a bit for that too. And, being a new mom, it just wasn't quite fitting. And so every couple of years, I found myself on this, pattern of switching jobs, blaming all of these external factors, like it must be the product, it must be the company, it must be the people, all these different things of why I'm not feeling fulfilled and why I'm feeling burnt out. And so I just started clinging to different self-help, self-development books. I went through a lot of different leadership programs and just really fell in love with personal and professional development. So that's kind of what kickstarted this whole thing for me, which we'll get to here in a second of what I do with that now. And I found myself just feeling like I got to do something with this. The sales job that I've had for the last 14 years was no longer cutting it for me. And the baby number two came, and I had some downtime over maternity leave to just really dive into what I could do with my passion for agriculture and my passion for personal and professional development. Ultimately, I decided I wanted to take this and run with it. And so I created a group coaching program and a mastermind called AgriMinds that says, okay, we want to be professionals, but we also have some crap going on at home. So how can I look at the intersection of my personal and my professional lives and really just learn, how do I navigate this? What are some tools and resources that I can use to show up better? And so today that brings me to coaching, training, and speaking professionals in the agriculture industry and just helping them navigate some of those same challenges that I endured, such as being a parent for the first time while also climbing the corporate ladder. How do I eliminate or at least work around burnout? So how do I do more of the stuff that fills my cup up and less of the stuff that drains me? How do I manage work-life balance? How do I make sure that if I'm going to switch jobs, do so with intention instead of just having this cycle of job hopping and continually feeling like I'm unfulfilled. And so today I have taken all of the lessons that I've learned over the past 14 years, combined with my certification in coaching, my passion for development and growth, and combined it and made this coaching and training business so where I can serve the agriculture industry. So that's a really quick spiel about who I am and what I do. At the end of the day, I just ultimately want to help other people because I so badly wish that I had someone or some resources that I could have used when I was going through those same things as well.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. I think as a young individual in the industry, both on the entrepreneurial side and then also on the professional side, I can relate to that very well. So I'm sure today's conversation is going to be hitting home for me. And I know a lot of our listeners as well that have those off the farm jobs, or even they are on the farm and figuring out how to have balance, which is so foreign to so many, and things like that. I would love to just start diving right into what is burnout, if people aren't familiar with it, and then also just kind of like the steps to overcoming that as well.
Oh, that's such a good question because I didn't know that the feeling that I was feeling had a name. Like now
Yes.
looking back, I'm like, how silly was I that I didn't realize I was actually burnt out? I just assumed that this is what being an adult felt like, that being overworked and tired and not feeling like you had time for life was what being an adult felt like. Like that was standard stuff. But someone told me several years ago, they said burnout is not doing too much work. Burnout is doing too much of the wrong type of work. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, so that's kind of what led me down the path of trying to figure out, well, what is the right type of work? And so today I use, different tools with clients to help us figure out what that is, to discover what are the things that really bring you joy. And I know that oftentimes people don't realize that they have a choice in that. They just think, okay, I've got to get the bills paid. I've got to show up to work. I've got a family to feed or whatever it is. And so I've just got to show up and do this stuff. When at the end of the day, you have a choice and you do get to align your purpose with your profession. And some of the times I say like your interests with your income. Like a lot of people don't realize that that's a thing. And so if you're feeling burnout, which could be I'm constantly stressed, I'm feeling exhausted, my family is getting the rest of me versus the best of me, right? Like they get the very end of the cup. They don't get the nice frothy milk at the top, right? Like they're getting the remnants of it. And I always like to say, like, those are the most important people to you, though. Your family and your friends, those are the people that are most important to you. Why do they get the scraps, And so if you're feeling burnt out, it's probably because you're feeling stress and anxiety and like you're getting pulled in a million different directions. So you've got so many hats to wear and you just can't feel completed. You don't feel rested. You don't feel like you are putting the right things into the right places. And so you're constantly just in this state of what do I do and how do I do it? That's draining you. That's what burnout is. And so if somebody is feeling those things, it's probably not because you're doing too much work, which we'll get into more of what that means here in a second, but it's probably because you're doing too much of the wrong work. And well, I'll go back to what I just said is like, I have been an entrepreneur for almost a year now, and I don't feel like I've worked at all in the past year. And I've been working hard and I've been working a lot, but it doesn't feel hard work like you would when you're doing stuff that's misaligned with your purpose and your talents. And so they always say, if you're doing something you love, it doesn't feel like you're working. And so that's how I help people eliminate or at least start to extinguish burnout as we start to align what their passions are and their purpose with their profession and the way that they're earning an income. And so it's a process. It's not something where just overnight you're like, oh, this is how you eliminate it and this is the thing, because I understand reality, right? Like sometimes we can't leave our jobs, sometimes we can't remove certain people from our lives or take off certain hats. but there are mindset shifts that we can start to change. There are things that we can do to put little slivers of joy in throughout our day to just keep that recharging happening before we've completely ran out of battery. And now, it's the phone is dead and you have to wait until it charges back up before you can use it. We start to pour into ourselves throughout the day too. So those are just a little bit of insights into how somebody could maybe recognize if they're burnt out and some of the things that they can do to start relieving or extinguishing that feeling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is so important to just get a really good basis down of what burnout is and understanding of it. And I'm sure some people were able to listen to this and be like, oh, maybe don't have all of those, but I can raise my hand for a couple of them. And I know I can do the same as well. And I think no matter what season of life you're in, you're going to be able to raise your hand for at least one of those. What are some practical, tips or things that people can do that are raising their hand right now? Like, oh no, I feel like I'm on the downward slope towards burnout. What can I do right now that is going to help me kind of turn that bus around?
The first thing that I always encourage people to do if they're like, okay, if there was one thing that you could do to just wave the magic wand and see some kind of change, what would it be? Stop for a second and pause. That's my first recommendation, is just pause. The world's not going to stop turning, I promise you. But just take a moment to just evaluate what is going
Mm-hmm.
on, because it could be as simple as trimming a couple of things off of your plate that you're like, why am I carrying that load around? Why am I
Yeah.
worrying about XYZ thing? Does that task have to be done right now? Like, just take a
Yeah.
moment to evaluate and assess the situation. And something that I always tell people, like, if you're on fire, what do they tell you to do when you're a kid? Stop, drop, and roll, right? So stop for a second, drop the ego, drop the pride, drop the tasks that don't align with where you are going in life, and roll with it, right? Like, roll to the things that do align, roll certain tasks to people that you can delegate things to. So that's the very first thing. If you're feeling on fire, you've got this burnout happening, stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good analogy. And I know that that's probably going to stick with me because analogies just stick with me in a little bit of a better way. And so that was so insightful for me that, you know what, sometimes it's okay to pause and slow down and take a break and take a breath, because I think that I just have such a hard time doing that sometimes with me personally. It's just like, go, go, go. We've got XYZ this week. This is what it looks like. There's no time for rest, anything like that. And I think that that is just so important to remember, that even in those busy seasons, we need to find room to just breathe and to just pause and to just be with our own mind and our own heart, which can be scary sometimes. I don't think that this is meant to necessarily be easy, but trust me, it's going to be a lot easier to take a break right now than to physically not be able to do anything once you hit burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another method that even my son uses, that there's a guidance counselor at school. When kids start to get a little overwhelmed, they share this tip. And so if you're in the moment of okay, burnout has set in, I'm freaking out, I'm about to have a panic attack, one of the tools that I always share with people is put your hand out like you're getting ready to give somebody a high five, and you turn it back to you. So your palm is facing you, and you just breathe up your thumb, breathe down your thumb. And if you're not looking at this video right now, I'm looking at my palm and I'm taking my pointer finger from my other hand and I'm tracing the outline of my hand like you're getting ready to draw a turkey right around Thanksgiving time, right? So you just outline the outsides of your fingers. And so you take a deep breath in, up the thumb, a deep breath down the thumb, and you're at the center of your palm now. And then you go up your pointer finger, you just follow that around. And so if you're right on the verge, if this is a very practical method that you can use right here, right now, just breathe in and around all of those fingers, and just
Yeah.
that's going to help you calm down a little bit. So even if you can't remember stop, drop, and roll, take a look at your hand and just do some breathing exercises to get yourself calmed down. And then just say, okay, what can I control? What can't I control? And just start from there too.
I think that that is such an important reminder of remembering what you can and can't control. Remembering like to ground yourself in like this is in my control and I have the ability to change this, and this is completely outside of my control. This is the weather. This is other people's actions. This is my kid throwing a temper tantrum even though I've tried everything under the sun. This like there's things that are in your control and there are things that are not, and I think that grounding yourself in the things that you can control, and then just trying to like ground your mind again, from going to the worst possible scenario or the worst place or things like that, that's just a really good reminder to ground yourself in those moments. I would love to talk more about like just kind of the path of burnout and what that looks like, because it's not just like, oh, we've hit burnout and then, oh, one day I'm not burnt out anymore. There's a whole kind of journey to that and what that looks like. And even if you're not too burnt out, like to the burnout point yet, and trying to turn that bus around, there are different paths that look like for that and just different things like that. So I'd love to hear your insight on this.
Yeah, burnout can happen a lot of different ways. Most of the time, it's one of those things that just kind of creeps up on you where you don't realize it, but another hat is added or another task is added to your plate, or all of a sudden you realize that the things that you kept saying yes to because you didn't want to make anybody else upset or you thought that that was the right thing to do, they catch up to you. And now all of a sudden you're feeling this weight on you and you didn't notice that it was creeping up. It was a slow burn to get to this point.
Yeah.
Other times, burnout could be, I thought I was signing on for this job. I went through the interview process. It all sounded great. And then I jump in and I get hired. I'm doing the work that I thought I was supposed to be doing. And turns out all these different things keep adding up. And I'm doing work that's different than what I was expecting. And now you're kind of put in this position where you're like, this is not what I signed up for. So how do I get out of this, right? So people stay there because they think things are going to get better, things are going to change, something different's going to happen. We wait on this someday to come. Burnout can just sometimes creep up on you too. And like I said just a little bit ago, burnout is not necessarily doing too much work. It's doing too much of the wrong type of work. And a lot of the times we don't notice that, especially like as entrepreneurs, right? Because I'm a business owner. I literally left my job to do the thing that I enjoyed doing. I built a business around it. Why am I not loving every aspect of this business? Well, I talk a lot about the Working Genius tool. If you've never heard of the Working Genius tool, it's a personality slash productivity tool that, similar to Myers-Briggs or Colors or Enneagram, if you know of any of those other personality assessments. And basically what it says is it outlines 6 different types of geniuses or 6 different types of work. And every job is a 6-letter job. But if we do too much of the wrong types of work or things that don't come naturally to us or fill our cups up and give us energy, it's going to extinguish us. It is going to absolutely drain us and just, we're going to be a mop on the floor. Like, we're just not going to feel motivated. We're going to be frustrated. We're not going to have any desire or motivation because we forgot what it felt like to be energized. And so, like I said, it can come about a couple of different ways. And I will just preface with, I am not a licensed or certified psychologist or therapist or counselor. I'm a coach. And so my studies and my certification have come from different avenues and on different angles of this. And so there's probably more scientific verbiage to this. But at the end of the day, burnout can come from just not doing anything that's energizing you. And I think in this go, go, go world that we live in, like you just mentioned, like, we may not understand that we're doing stuff that doesn't align with us because we're doing stuff that maybe our spouse wants us to do or our kids want us to do or in-laws or our boss, right? Like, we're just out here trying to make sure that we're showing up, we're doing our job, we're doing what's required of us. And at the end of the day, if we're feeling tired and burnt out and depleted, it could be that we're going about it through the wrong mindset. We're doing it in a different way that, maybe we could just shift the type of work. So like, for example, I don't want to go exercise because I hate running. But what I do love to do is stretch and do yoga. I also love to hike because it's different for my brain. Running feels like tenacity work. It's checking a box. I'm not motivated by just completing the thing. What I'm motivated by is time to think, time to be creative with ideas. And so when I'm out hiking or if I'm doing yoga, my mind isn't just trying to check something off a list. It's my outlet. And so I can do the same type of work or the same task through a different lens. That's not going to feel like hard work, or it's not going to feel like it's something that's draining me. And so that doesn't burn me out from exercising if I do it through that lens. So like I said, it's not just necessarily about work, like your physical job. It can be about household tasks. It can be from running kids around. Like I get burnt out on making supper every night, you know? But if I do it through the different lens, keep things fresh. Sometimes I assign dinner to my husband or my son, right? Like, it's your turn to cook tonight. I still have to get fed. The thing still has to get done, but we're just doing it through a different method or a different lens. So you could apply it in all aspects of your life as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that is just truly, truly, truly some really great practical advice that it can apply to every aspect of your life. It doesn't have to be your career. It doesn't have to be your business. It can be a organization that you volunteer to. It can be being a mom. It can be just life in general. It doesn't have to. It's not a one size fits all type of scenario, and it's not a one size fits all for every person. And I think that it's just one of those things that every person is going to experience it differently, and there's some beauty to that, but it also makes it kind of unfortunate that we can't just sit here and say, hey, do XYZ and you'll feel better type of thing. It's a journey for each individual. And I think what you kind of touched on at the end plays right into creating healthy boundaries and what that kind of looks like, because boundaries are hard and they are not easy. And especially, it's not just setting the boundary that's hard, it's maintaining the boundary that's hard. It's putting your foot down when that boundary is getting crossed or things like that. So I would love to hear kind of your insight on how that plays into burnout and then just boundaries in general as well.
Yeah, I love that. I actually just published a couple of different articles on LinkedIn about boundaries. And one of the things that I really just love to make sure people understand is there is a difference between boundaries and requests. So boundaries are things that we are responsible for, that I am saying I am doing or not doing, and it requires zero effort or action from somebody else. Whereas a request is we're asking somebody else something. And so, how I can, I guess, differentiate the two is that a boundary is what you're willing to do or not willing to do, an experience or thing from other people. It's a limit that you're setting. A request is more so like, I want this from you. It's an ask. And it oftentimes, like I said, people misunderstand those two things. And so the key there is communication and really just making sure that people understand, like, is this something that I'm willing to tolerate? If not, here's what's going to happen. Right. So there was this video that I saw. I have no idea what the girl's name is. I don't know where I saw it. I think it may be TikTok. And it was basically this girl saying, like, every time her and her son get in the elevator, the son just pushes every single button. And she gets so mad because she's always like, when we get in this elevator, do not push these buttons. Like, do not push these buttons. What happens? The son pushes the buttons every single time and she gets so ticked. And so she's, she would even like feel like she had to threaten the kid. Like, the next time you push these buttons, I'm going to take away such and such, or you're going to have to do such and such. Like, this is what's going to happen. And that was actually a request. She was not setting boundaries with her kids. She was requesting something. And so what she did was she said, you know what, the next time I get into this elevator, before he even has a chance to push the button and for me to go through this same spiel, I'm going to stand in between me and the buttons, or I'm going to stand in between the kid and the buttons. So he has never gotten a chance to push the buttons at all. And she was being proactive in the sense. So basically what she said was, I was putting a boundary out there. It required zero effort from the kid, but I was saying, I will not allow you to push these buttons. And you could take that metaphorically as well if you wanted to, but at the end of it all, it's the difference between setting a boundary and making a request is the action that you are taking. Say, for example, like I used to have this job where my boss wanted to have a stand-up call one time a week at 7:30 in the morning. Well, that is prime time for me to be taking kids to school. And I'm just not okay with being on a company call at 7:30 in the morning. My coworkers had zero problem with it. They didn't have young kids at home. They were eager, ready to start their day. So it was fine, right? That was a non-negotiable for me. And I communicated that with my boss. I said, that is a no-go for me. And so here's a couple of options that you can do. You can make a request to your manager and your team and saying, this time doesn't work for me. Is there any way that we can move this meeting to a different time? Or you can set a boundary to say, I will not be on that call. If you want me to understand or know what the information was, I'd be happy to chat with you from this time to this time for a recap. But that's just something I'm not willing to do. It's a boundary of mine. I'm not going to jump on a call at 7:30 in the morning one time a week. I'm just not going to do it. And for whatever reason. And so some of the key things to setting boundaries is make a decision and have your back on it. Those are my values. No one has to understand it. I don't need to explain it to anyone, but knowing that by providing context, I could potentially change the outcome. The request and the boundary could be affected, right? So you can absolutely share why you're deciding to do that, but you're not required to. Another thing when it comes to setting boundaries and, really sticking to them and executing them is making sure that you're okay with saying no, which a lot of people have a hard time doing. But when you say no, you're allowing yourself to say yes to the things that do align with the life that you're trying to build. When you say no to stuff that's crossing your mental, spiritual, financial, physical boundaries, that's allowing you to be in control of your mental and your physical space. And so it's super powerful. I could go on and on about the different types of tips or tricks or whatever, but to not get completely off track there, it's important to set boundaries, but also knowing that if you set them and you don't communicate them, they're probably going to be crossed, right? So it's super powerful to not only set them, but to share them and maybe provide a little bit of context around why that's important to you with those around.
Yeah, for sure. Can you expand a little bit more on once you set that boundary and you have done your due diligence of communicating that boundary as well? I think that that is such an important little tick in there that you got to make sure you check that box of communicating that boundary, actually keeping that boundary, because that can be really hard to say no or to put your foot down in certain situations or things like that. It can bring a lot of imposter syndrome or just like other doubts or worries, especially as like new people in your career paths. You want to be the person that is always accessible or just different things like that. But that can lead to burnout. That can lead to you not being fulfilled and your cup being filled and all of those different things. So talk a little bit more about just the ability to say no and what that kind of means.
Yeah, saying no is tricky for a lot of people, especially if you have a people pleasing tendency. I don't necessarily have the people pleasing tendency. I've been pretty good at being like, that's a no for me. Like Simon Cowell, that's a no for me.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people who, especially if they have the genius of enablement, they like feel like it's their due diligence. They feel like it's their life's mission to step in and help other people. And so it's not only important to recognize what your boundaries are, it's super important to recognize what other people's boundaries are too, because that could ruin some relationships as well. But there's an art to saying no. And some of the tips that I always share with people on how to start doing that is, again, stopping before you respond. Like take just 1 second to ask yourself, is this really something I want to say yes to? How will this help me or will this hurt me? And Brene Brown shared a story one time where she's got this ring They're kind of like anxiety rings or like fidget spinner rings, where she wears this ring and it has this little spinner thing on it. And she says, anytime somebody asks me something that I feel like may compromise my boundaries, I spin that thing 3 times. And that 3 seconds gives me the moment that I need to really identify, is this going to help me or is this going to hurt me? Am I going to choose temporary discomfort, meaning saying no, versus long-term resentment because I've said something or said yes to something that I don't actually want to say yes to? So give yourself a moment before you actually respond. So that actually helps you, right? Like I said, it's kind of an art in saying no. Another thing is, if you don't actually know what your boundaries are, or if you don't know what your priorities are right now, you need to do a little bit of prep work, right? Like if you're having a hard time saying no, this is something that I would highly encourage you to do, is to get really clear on what your boundaries are. Because again, if you don't know what they are, they're going to get crossed because nobody else knows what they are either. And so just take a couple of minutes and just define, like, what are you okay with? What are you not okay with? What are your non-negotiables as an employee, as a parent, as a spouse, as a board member, whatever role you play? What are your non-negotiables? And that will help you, more easily say no to requests or demands even that compromise that. And some other things that I would encourage you to do is to practice self-validation and saying, like, remind yourself of what your boundaries are. And like, you are very capable of making good decisions. You're very capable of knowing what's right and what's wrong. And a lot of the times when people are afraid to say no, it's because they don't necessarily have a lot of confidence, whether it's in a specific area or in general. And so practicing that self-validation and reminding yourself, like, I set these boundaries for a reason because I don't want to feel like X. I don't want to have to say no to this. I don't want to have to feel this way because of whatever. I don't want to ruin a relationship. But at the end of the day, you are human. And saying no is hard sometimes because you don't want to upset a family member. Maybe you don't want to ruin a relationship. That sometimes you have to compromise. So just giving yourself a little bit of grace. Practice saying no to yourself in the mirror. Like maybe I have to set boundaries around certain things myself. And I'm like, Kacee, remember the last time you said yes to this thing, this happened, and you don't want to feel that way anymore. So, just reminding yourself of why you're setting those boundaries in the first place can help you say no more often as well.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more just on everything that you said and just explained. And I think that a big part of setting boundaries and making sure that you're extinguishing that burnout and everything like that, whether you're a business owner or whether you are in the corporate world or things like that, is the ability to delegate, whether that be delegating in the workplace, whether that be delegating your taxes, whether that be delegating your bookkeeping or your childcare or the fact that your husband cooks 3 nights a week or something like that, whatever that delegation kind of looks like. I would love to chat a little bit more about just what delegation is and how to start delegating and just kind of like those practical steps that you can take as well.
Yeah, I talk a lot about delegation, but there's 2 other pieces that I'll make sure to add with that. Anytime we're trying to set boundaries, we're trying to get honed in on maybe our time management because, we do have to get work done. Sometimes it's not enjoyable, but we also want to make sure that we're adding in stuff throughout our day or nights and weekends that fill our cup up and help us just find that balance. Because again, I'm not unrealistic to the fact that there's work that has to get done. And it's not always as easy as just like, I can do everything that I want to do for work that I enjoy. Totally get that. So time management is a big piece in that. And there's 3 steps that I always tell people to look at. What can I automate? What can I delegate? And what can I eliminate? Because sometimes there is stuff that you're carrying around mentally or even physically that you don't have to, like, drop it. And so automate, delegate, and eliminate are 3 different steps that I highly encourage people to do. I use this tool called the brain dump worksheet with a lot of my clients, where the one section is the whole to-do list, right? They have, this is everything that has to get done. And then there's a next step where it goes into 3 funneled boxes where, okay, here's the to-do list. I'm going to take this item. Is it something I need to automate, delegate, or eliminate? Is this something I need to do now? Is this something I need to do next? Is this something I need to do later? And just really getting organized. And a lot of the times, people's to-do lists contain stuff that they don't need to have on their to-do list. It just does not make sense for them to be carrying around. Is that something that you can delegate? So let's dive into delegating a little bit further. There's so many things that I took responsibility for when I got married, right? Like, I come from a very traditional household. And so my grandma and my mom were both stay-at-home farm wives. So cooking and taking meals to the field, taking care of the kids, making sure that the house is picked up, running errands, like those were things that I saw the women in my life doing. So those were their responsibilities. The men were always responsible for making the paycheck, taking care of the oil changes, mowing the yards, like doing all the manly things, right? Like that's just how I grew up. That was my culture. That was my conditioning and programming for what I thought a standard housewife should be doing. And when I got married, our roles were a little bit different. I was the one traveling for work. I had the crazy hours with plot season and harvest and all the things. And my husband had the steady 9 to 5. And so when we started having kids, it was like I was doing like the males' hours and how their work day would go. And I was doing the stuff that the standard housewife was doing. And so I had to come home and I just felt like I was wearing all of the hats. And so I had to have this conversation with my husband. I'm like, if I'm out running around and doing the work and doing this part on those nights, then I need you to be running the kids around or getting supper ready or at least set something out. And so just having that communication of like, it's not actually my responsibility. If he wants fed, he's a grown man, he can absolutely cook his own meal. I took on tasks in our household because I felt like it was my responsibility, when actually it's our responsibility. You know what I mean? These are our kids. This is our household. This is our bill, right? And so we just had to have that conversation of, I am better at doing these certain things, or I enjoy doing these certain tasks. If there is a time or a day where the things that I've typically shared or typically put on that responsibility, we need to share that, and vice versa. If my husband is working long hours or he has to go out of town or whatever, I'm mowing the yard, right? Like, it's not like this is the man's role or this is the women's role. Same thing with my kids, right? I'm typically the one loading the dishwasher. I'm typically the one vacuuming. I'm folding the laundry. My son is perfectly capable of putting away his own laundry. My son is perfectly capable of loading the dishwasher or picking up his toys. I have a 1-year-old girl, and she has now been able to pick up her socks off the floor and go put them in her laundry basket. Like, she's 1. So don't tell me that you can't delegate certain things around your household to your kids. And I know that you're probably having some mom listeners who are like, oh, my kids would never do that. They can. It's going to take some time. It's like training a new puppy. But I promise you, when you can start delegating those things to your kids or to your spouse, it can be a game changer in some of the household tasks. Now at work, I know a lot of people who struggle with delegating certain projects or tasks to team members or, whatever, because it might not get done right. Here's what I have to say about that. You hired this person for a reason. Trust them to do their job. If they are not capable of executing a project in the way that you see fit, or you don't trust that the work is going to get done, maybe we need a new employee. That's how I feel about that. And I know that that's a lot easier said than done, but I mean, if it is that big of an issue, you may need to change some people up. And here's another tool, right? I use the Working Genius a lot. There's a team map that we can build based off of what our geniuses are. Sometimes if we're seeing that our employees are burnt out, They're not motivated. They're not showing up the way that they should be showing up, or maybe they're not executing projects in the way that we think that they should. Maybe it means that they're doing the wrong type of work. We value them as an employee, but let's just say we have 2 employees on our team and they have different geniuses, and the type of work that they are doing just isn't aligned with their genius. It's going to cause them to get burnt out. They're not going to execute these projects the way that they should be. Maybe it's just taking a little bit of time to understand what those geniuses are, what their skills or talents or God-given talents are. And it just is as simple as swapping the projects with the other person. I mean, that's the kind of awareness that it could be the game changer in your business. Maybe we don't need to actually clean house. Maybe it just means we're putting the wrong type of work on the wrong person, right? Because remember, burnout is not doing too much work. It's doing too much of the wrong type of work. And so when we have the awareness and the clarity and we're able to communicate these things around why I'm feeling burnt out. Hey, boss, I'm doing too much of this type of work, or so-and-so got assigned that type of project and I got this. I really want to do more of those types of projects. So next time, could we just maybe swap? Or if both people have the same types of geniuses, maybe we need to fill that gap and hire somebody who has the genius of whatever type of work needs to be done. So that's how we can build stronger teams, work better together in the workplace, build boundaries in the workplace and at home, and ultimately, at the end of the day, begin to extinguish that burnout.
Yeah, for sure. I think the one word that pretty much summarizes all of this up is balance. It's truly just having that balance at home, having that balance at work, and just everything in between. And I think that it's a synergy that is hard to accomplish sometimes or hard to maintain sometimes. But I think it is so important that we strive for that balance and strive to reach that place, because without it, we're not going to be able to show up fully for our family or show up fully for what actually matters, because we're going to spend so much time letting all of our energy go to things that don't actually matter to us, to things that don't actually light our fire, to things that don't actually make you want to get out of bed in the morning. And it's so important that we only have so much time on this earth, and God gave us all such amazing talents and abilities, and we are all so fearfully and wonderfully made. And it's one of those things that you can't wake up every single day and hate what you do. You're not living in your purpose if you hate what you do, or if you're just not feeling that balance. Take a second to take a breath and evaluate everything. What would your advice be to kind of like start that evaluation of what does that evaluation look like? What do I even ask myself? What do I sit down and do to start down this path?
I think that's such a good question because, kind of going back to the agriculture industry, right? Most people don't do this type of work. Most people don't go through this type of growth.
Yep.
I was that same person up until about 2 years ago because I thought I needed to follow in my dad and my grandpa and his dad's footsteps, right? We're on a 4th-generation row crop farm. And if I don't take over the farming operation, that legacy dies. What happens to all of our family's farmland? I just felt like it was my responsibility to do the thing that those before me did. And going off of that track, discovering who I actually am and doing that work was scary. It was painful and uncomfortable. I had a lot of self-sabotaging thoughts like, what's my dad going to think? Did I let him down? I screwed up our 4th-generation legacy, like so many thoughts. And I know that that's so common in our farming and ranching industry because, again, we feel like we've owed so-and-so, like we have this responsibility, we have this pressure to do certain things. It's confusing, right? So like if someone were to start this process, it comes down to just figuring out, what do you want? Not what does mom and dad want, not what does your spouse want, not what does your boss want, what do you want? And there's this concept that I've just recently learned about that I've almost become obsessed with, and it's called Ikigai. And it's this concept of finding this balance. And just in case people aren't sure, it's spelled Ikigai, and it's pronounced Ikigai. And essentially, what it stands for is life's worth. And it's this balance. So, picture you've got these four circles and they all intersect at the middle, like this graph. And it comes down to, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And how can you use what you've got in order to be rewarded and to also, meet the needs of the world? And so when you find the balance between those things, that synergy at the middle, like that's the key, that's the balance. And so again, it comes down to aligning your purpose with your profession, aligning your interests with the way that you earn an income. Like, I've said all that, but there's a legitimate name now, which is Ikigai, that I just learned about. I'm like, how did I not know about this? And so I highly suggest people to research that. I mean, there's some 12-minute TED Talks on YouTube about this concept of doing the things that you love to do, finding out what you're good at, and then using that to serve the world and earn an income at the same time. And again, I think that most people within the agriculture industry have never considered that as an option because our path was paved for us at times. And so it really just comes down to, what do you want out of this life? What's important to you? Who is important to you? And what are you willing to do about it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I wrote notes down for that and I'm going to go start researching myself after this, but it is such a foreign concept to the agricultural industry. This idea of mental wellness and personal growth and all the woo woo things that, as my dad calls them, he says that's very woo woo sometimes. And, but there's so much research and science and just greatness behind this, that I think that if we, as this next generation coming up in agriculture, want to continue to succeed and not fail our family's legacies, whatever that looks like, we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our family, and we owe it to just everyone around us, and mostly to ourselves, to not let this kind of just go swept under the rug, to actually dive into who you are as an individual, and how you function and what makes you tick, and all of these different things that, what makes you tick may not be running the family farm or ranch. And that is hard. That is really hard, especially as an only child or things like that. Or maybe you have siblings and you've just decided that that's not what makes you tick. Talk a little bit about that person right there that thinks that going down a different path of what, like, they sit back and they make this ideal dream of what their future looks like. They sit back and it's not running the family operation, or maybe it's still being involved, but not at the level that it is right now. What that kind of looks like and how to come over that hump and that hill of not wanting to disappoint your family or hurt your family or fail your family, or just different things like that.
Yeah, I can speak to that so personally because that was me, right? Like, I left my farm to go to school to get a degree in agriculture. I came back to the farm. I had these expectations. The timing wasn't right, so I moved away. I came back to the farm. My husband and I had these expectations that we were going to take things over, and I mean, we struggled with that for a really long time, and I didn't understand why. And my parents wanted me to be involved. They didn't have an exit strategy that I knew about. And so I was like constantly feeling like I had to pull this information out of them. Like, there are people that I know that would kill to take over their family farm, but the option's not there. Here I am waving my hand saying, hello, I'm ready. Tell me everything I need to know. I want to learn how to do this. I want this. I want to take it on. And for some reason, there was this big disconnect. And I mean, I've beat myself up about it for a long time, I mean, years. And I just couldn't understand, like, why don't you guys want me here? Like, do you think I'm not capable of taking over the farm? Like, I don't have any brothers. I've got, I had three. I have now two sisters that would be a potential, runner up for taking over the farm, but they had no interest. And so I was just like, it's up to me. Like, don't you want me to do something about this? And I just couldn't understand it. And finally, after doing a lot of introspection and just working on myself over the last several years, I came to terms with realizing like I wasn't born to be a farmer. And like that was really hard for me to accept. Like I had to I had to get rid of these expectations that like that was my dream life. I thought I was going to run the farm. I thought my husband and I were going to be farmers. Like that was what we were going to do. And it just wasn't our reality, and I couldn't comprehend it. And finally, after realizing like, oh yeah, like what was I born to do? It was not farming. Like, and so I had a lot of conversations with my coach about being a farm owner versus being a farm operator, and what that could look like. And ultimately I realized I don't want to be a farm owner either. Like maybe I want to be a land owner, but at the end of the day, like that doesn't bring me joy. It was the connection and the tie to the culture, my childhood, how I felt growing up on the farm, and the connection with my, forefathers, right? Like the generations ahead of me. Like there was just something powerful about that. And I finally had this conversation with my mom and my dad, and I was like, like I think I'm just going to like let go of this expectation. Like if you guys need me during planting and harvest part-time, like to run parts around or move equipment, or if you need me to come work ground or run the combine or auger cart or something, like call me and I will absolutely help. But like, I think
Yeah.
I've just kind of let go of that. I don't know if expectation or reality or dream is the right word, but whatever that thing is, I'm letting go. And it felt good to get that off my chest, because I held this grudge and this pain for a long time about my parents. And my dad goes, I think that's a good idea. And I'm like, but why? Like, can we just talk about this? And my dad, he looks like the guys off of Duck Dynasty, like the big beards, the big burly guys. And like, he's not an emotions kind of guy. And I was like, but can we talk about this? Like, can you share with me? Like, give me something. I'm a feelings person. I want to know. And he's just like, I didn't want to farm. Like, why would I want to put that on you? And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hang on. What did you just say? And he goes, well, did you think I wanted to be a farmer? Like, no. When I was growing up, like as soon as I could work, my dad started putting these tasks on me. And I didn't really know that, like, I couldn't explore other options back then. It's not like I could just Google jobs near blah, blah, blah. Like, that wasn't a thing. And I don't think if he was my age now, or if he was young in today's world, I don't think farming would have been his profession. I don't know that for sure, and there's no way of knowing. But just kind of hearing him talk about like, I didn't really know I had options. I didn't know that I could explore something other than farming. I didn't know that having a personality assessment to tell me what's going to bring me joy was a thing, and aligning your interests to the way that you provide for your family wasn't a thing back then. And so hearing him say, I don't know if I would have chosen to be a farmer if he had the choice, and he didn't want to burden me with the same things that he felt burdened by because his dad just put this stuff on him. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, it does suck that, once our farm is done with my parents, it's done. But who knows how that's going to turn out? I mean, anything could change in the next 5-10 years. But just hearing my dad say, like, I didn't want to burden you with that, was like a whole perspective change, that I was like, oh, I thought I was letting you down because I wasn't trying hard enough to take over the farm. Like maybe I didn't prove myself enough to let you think that I was actually in it. But he had this whole other perspective of, I didn't want to be a farmer. That's just what I've done. That's just how I've earned money. Whether he enjoyed it or not, I'm sure there was parts that he loves. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have kept doing it. I don't know. But who knows, right? Like, we don't know. So I took the scenic route, so you're answering your question there. But at the end of the day, we have these expectations that that may not actually be our reality, right? And so having those conversations, communicating how you're feeling with the other people involved, maybe it's mom and dad, maybe it's whoever else, your boss, it's super important. Because again, I was totally off track with what my dad was thinking, and I thought I was going to let him down because I wasn't going to take over the farm, when at the end of the day, he was trying not to hold me back. He was trying to get me to experience a whole different life. And so if we're talking about the family where maybe it's a couple of brothers and sisters working together to keep the family legacy alive, how can we do this with intention? Maybe being out in the field and doing operations isn't your strong suit, but maybe doing some marketing or being in the office is where you belong, right? Like just understanding what your talents are and how to apply it to your current situation could be helpful, right? Communicating those types of things is super important. So anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but it all comes down to awareness and having those conversations with others.
Yeah, communication, man. I think that that is just truly the basis of a lot of this, and a lot of issues that we have or just uncertainties that we have is just communicating it. And don't feel like you have to have the perfect thing to say or it all figured out before you go start that conversation. Sometimes it's just planting the seed and then leaving it be. Plant the seed, walk
Mm-hmm.
away, and then revisit it and revisit it again and again and again and continue that conversation, and just make sure that you or family members or your boss or whoever this applies to knows that this is just like an open door of communication that you have opened, that we can revisit at any time. And we can open this door again whenever you are ready. If you have any questions, anything like that, that this door of communication is always and constantly open for insight, questions, anything. It's just kind of always there. And I think that just planting that seed sometimes is the first step that we need to take on a lot of those things. So, Kacee, we've talked about so many really phenomenal things today. And I know that I got so much from this podcast episode, and I know that so many viewers did as well. I would love to start rounding it out with the question that I ask all of our amazing guests that come on to the next generation. What would be one piece of advice that you would like to give to the next generation of agriculture, or multiple, whatever, whatever floats your boat on that? But
yeah, I have so many pieces of advice that I would like to offer my younger self, like, and so that's who I'm thinking of when I think of this next generation and what I wish somebody would tell me. And at the end of the day, it would just be, you're not going to know the answers. Like, no matter what piece of advice somebody gives you, it's going to change, right? Like, I had gotten so much advice from so many different people that steered me down a path that was not the right path, right? And I literally just posted about this today. Like, I disagree was the topic on this social media post. And it's like, I thought that was the right move for me. And as the years have gone by, I've just collected more and more information, learned more and more about myself. And the decisions that I made at that time were the right decisions. But looking back, I'm like, I wish I would have done that. Like, you're not going to know. You're not going to have the right piece of advice that's going to be everlasting. Like, times are going to change, people are going to change, perspectives are going to change. So if I could just like simplify that into one piece of information, it's just like, just be be right there where your feet are, accept things for what they are. That's your reality, no matter what. Like, there's not a perfect piece of advice. And I put people on pedestals growing up of like, oh, that person had the right piece of advice for me. That person's the wise one. That person has the answers. And then I would get let down because I had this expectation, right? I had these people on this pedestal. And if I could look back to younger Kacee and just be like, girl, don't fret it. Like, this isn't good. This has its season, right? This too shall pass. That
Yeah.
information may be relevant for now, but it may not be relevant later. So, like, just trust your gut, trust your intuition, get to know who you are, what's best for Kacee, and let the rest go. Like, it's just not worth the mental capacity to carry the worry about, like, what the future is going to hold. Like, yeah, you can think about it, but you should not let it hold you back. Like, just be present, take an inventory of what you got going on, and just go day by day.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Kacee, for that wonderful piece of advice. And I think that that is something that I kind of needed the reminder on as well within my own life. So thank you so much for coming on today. All of your wealth of wisdom, everything like that. I will have all of Kacee's social media profiles, her website, everything else that you could possibly think of linked in the show notes. Make sure you guys go give her a follow and just stay in touch if you need any coaching or anything like that. Want to join AgriMinds if you're kind of like raising your hand, like, oh, I would love to learn more, know more about this work life balance and just life balance in general. I will have all of that linked down below as well. So thank you so much, Kacee. I appreciate you coming on for another episode of The Next Generation. And for all of you guests out there, we will see y'all next week.